Danny Rucker's knuckles were white against the wrench as he tightened the final bolt on the tractor's transmission. The Kansas evening air hung heavy in the farm shop, dust motes dancing in the last rays of sunlight streaming through the grimy windows. Cricket songs rose and fell outside like nature's metronome, marking time as surely as the ancient wall clock that had hung in Hank Miller's repair shop for 30 years. Danny rolled his shoulders, wincing at the tightness that had settled there after 8 straight hours of mechanical surgery on the half-assembled John Deere. "That'll do it," he muttered to himself, patting the tractor's green flank like an old horse. The clock read 8:47 p.m., later than he'd planned to stay, but Hank needed this rig operational by tomorrow morning. Danny's thoughts drifted to the cold beer waiting in his fridge, the hot shower that would wash away the day's grime, and the possibility of seeing his girlfriend Allie before the day was completely shot. Simple pleasures for a simple life, and that suited Danny Rucker just fine. He flicked off the shop lights, the fluorescents stuttering reluctantly into darkness as he jangled his keys in his pocket. The parking lot behind the shop was empty, save for his battered pickup, the lone sentinel in a sea of gravel. Danny yawned, stretching his lean frame as the cool evening air hit his face. That's when he noticed the silence. The crickets had stopped, all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch on the Kansas nightlife. Danny paused. Keys halfway to the truck's door. Something felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate, a pressure in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks, except the sky was clear and star-filled. Then he saw it, a geometric pattern of lights hovering about 50 feet above the lot, perfect angles and lines forming what looked almost like a circuit board in the sky. "What the hell?" Danny squinted upward, wondering if this was some new drone light show from the county fair drifting his way. But there was no sound, just the hovering lights, pulsing slightly, casting strange angular shadows across the gravel. He tried to take a step backward and discovered he couldn't move. Not paralyzed exactly. He could feel his muscles straining, but locked in place, as if the air itself had solidified around him. Panic surged through his body as he struggled against the invisible restraint. A humming sound began, low at first, then building to something that felt like microwave popcorn through a subwoofer, a staccato vibration that rattled his teeth and blurred his vision. The lights descended, expanding into a perfect geometric dome around him. Danny's grease-stained hands slipped uselessly against his truck keys as his feet left the ground. The last thing he saw was the farm shop receding beneath him, growing smaller until Kansas itself was just a dark patch in a sea of lights, and then nothing at all. When Danny came to, he was lying on something cold and uncomfortably hard. His head throbbed with each heartbeat, and his mouth tasted like he'd been gargling pennies. He groaned, forcing his eyes open against the harsh white light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Subject demonstrates signs of consciousness," said a voice. Or at least, Danny thought it was a voice. It sounded like someone running their fingers over a comb while speaking through a broken translator app. Danny sat up, immediately regretting the decision as vertigo swept over him. When his vision cleared, he found himself staring at a creature that resembled nothing so much as a giant seahorse, standing upright on something like a snail's foot. Its skin glistened with an oily iridescence, and what might have been eyes swiveled independently on stalks protruding from its elongated head. Danny's first instinct was to scream. His second was to vomit. He compromised by doing neither, and instead managed a strangled, "What the fuck?" 4 more of the seahorse creatures glided into view, surrounding him. They were each about 7 feet tall, and Danny realized he was lying on some kind of examination table in a room with walls that seemed to shift colors subtly, like the inside of a soap bubble. "Neural mapping indicates rudimentary language capacity," said another seahorse thing, this one with patterns of pulsing blue light under its translucent skin. "Attempting interface." Something cold and metallic pressed against Danny's temple. There was a sensation like an ice pick being driven into his brain, followed by a cascade of unintelligible symbols flooding his vision. Danny cried out, clutching his head as the symbols flickered faster, then faded. "Interface rejected," said the first creature. "Compatibility insufficient." "Physical assessment required," said a third. "Transfer to processing." Danny tried to stand, to run, to do anything, but his limbs wouldn't respond correctly. The room spun around him, and darkness claimed him once more. The next time Danny woke, he was wearing what felt like a jumpsuit made of some slick, paper-like material. He lay on a thin mat in a small, featureless cube. One wall appeared to be transparent, looking out onto what seemed to be an endless concrete slab filled with hundreds, maybe thousands, of similar cubes arranged in precise rows. Each contained a different creature. Some looked vaguely humanoid. Others were amorphous blobs. Still others resembled insects or reptiles or things Danny had no frame of reference for. "Good. You're awake." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere, heavily accented but understandable. "Stand and face forward for initial assessment." Danny's legs were wobbly, but he managed to get upright. "Where am I? Who are you people? What the hell is going on?" "You are designation 7294 Earth. You have been conscripted under Coalition emergency protocols. This is Facility Mess Hole. You will comply with all instructions." "Mess hole," Danny repeated incredulously. "Did you seriously name your alien prison Mess Hole?" There was a pause. The translation matrix adapts terminology to recipient neural patterns. "The facility designation is not relevant. Prepare for processing." The transparent wall slid open, and Danny found himself herded into a line with a dozen other bizarre creatures. Some towered over him. Others barely reached his knees. All wore similar papery jumpsuits in various colors. Danny's was a dull orange. The line shuffled forward toward a series of scanning arches. Each creature would step through, be bathed in pulses of light, and then directed to one of several branching pathways. When Danny's turn came, he hesitated, earning a prod from behind by something with too many limbs. "Step forward. Designation 7294 Earth," said the same voice from before. Danny reluctantly walked through the arch. Lights flickered over him, and strange symbols appeared in the air around his body. There were beeps, clicks, and what sounded like an annoyed sigh. "Anomalous readings. Proceed to secondary assessment." A glowing path appeared on the floor, leading Danny away from the main group. He followed it, having little choice, until he reached a smaller room where a creature that resembled an oil slick poured over a military uniform waited. Two metallic dots on what might have been its chest flickered as it spoke. "Another unregistered biosystem. Wonderful." Its voice dripped with sarcasm. "I am Sergeant Karth, and you are now my problem." "Look," Danny started, finding his voice at last. "There's been a mistake. I'm just a mechanic from Kansas. I fix tractors. I'm not supposed to be here." Sergeant Karth made a bubbling sound that might have been laughter. "None of you are supposed to be here. The chitlings don't care about your previous occupation or your feelings on conscription. The Coalition needs bodies, and yours was available. Now, let's find out what you're good for, if anything." Over the next several hours, Danny was subjected to a battery of incomprehensible tests. Machines hummed and whirred, taking samples of his blood, skin, and hair. Neural interfaces were attempted and failed repeatedly, each one causing Danny increasing discomfort. Scanners mapped his body down to the cellular level, projecting holograms of his internal systems that Sergeant Karth studied with increasing interest. "Interesting," Karth bubbled, tapping a display showing what Danny assumed was his endocrine system. "Most interesting. You might not be completely useless after all." Danny was eventually led to a massive hall filled with long tables. Creatures of all descriptions sat eating, or at least ingesting, substances that ranged from glowing liquids to writhing tentacles. Danny's stomach turned. Nutritional period, Karth announced. Find your compatible sustenance and consume. Next assessment begins in one rotation. Left alone, Danny stared helplessly at the array of food stations, none of which appeared to contain anything remotely edible for humans. His stomach growled loudly. First cycle? A voice like rustling leaves came from behind him. Danny turned to find himself facing what looked like a 7-foot stick insect, its compound eyes reflecting his bewildered expression back at him. You seem disoriented. That's putting it mildly, Danny admitted. I have no idea what I can eat here. The stick insect's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. I am Meeker, third cycle conscript from Calliope. Your physiology appears carbon-based protein compatible. Follow. Meeker led Danny to a station dispensing gray paste that smelled faintly of wet cardboard. Protein synthesis. Not pleasant, but nutritionally adequate for most carbon structures. Danny accepted a bowl of the paste with a grimace. Thanks. I'm Danny, from Earth. Earth, Meeker repeated, the word sounding strange through its mandibles. Unregistered system. Many unregistered arrivals lately. Coalition expands recruitment reach as war progresses. They sat at an empty table, and Danny reluctantly tried the paste. It tasted exactly as bad as it looked, but his hunger overrode his disgust. As he ate, he noticed other creatures watching him with what he interpreted as curiosity. Why is everyone staring? He asked Meeker. The insectoid's antennae twitched. New physiologies always draw attention. Assessment performances circulate quickly here. Word is, you confuse the primary scanners. Is that good or bad? Depends on what they find useful about you. Meeker's compound eyes swiveled toward a new arrival approaching their table, a mantis-like creature with elaborate markings on its carapace. Ah, Hioki. Linguistics division. Hioki clicked and chittered, and Meeker responded in kind before turning back to Danny. Hioki wishes to observe your speech patterns. Linguistic division seeks to improve translation matrices. Danny shrugged. Tell them knock themselves out. Meeker translated, and Hioki settled nearby, unfolding what looked like monitoring equipment from a compartment in its exoskeleton. What exactly is happening here? Danny asked, lowering his voice. Where are we? What is this coalition? And what the hell are chitlings? Meeker's antennae drooped slightly. The coalition of sentient systems faces extinction-level threat from the chitling horde. Chitlings consume all organic matter, convert planets to breeding grounds. Coalition conscripts viable life forms from frontier systems for defense force. This facility prepares conscripts for combat deployment. Danny set down his spoon. You're saying I've been drafted into an alien war? Correct assessment. And these chitlings, they're what, space locusts? Imprecise but adequate analogy, Meeker said. 12 systems lost already. Coalition defensive line fails. New conscripts needed constantly. Danny stared down at his gray paste, appetite gone. How do I get home? Meeker's mandibles clicked in what might have been sympathy. Home exists only in memory now. Earth Danny. Service to Coalition is only path forward. The next several days, or what Danny assumed were days, as time measurement seemed arbitrary in the facility, were filled with grueling physical training. Conscripts were divided into groups based on roughly compatible physiologies and put through exercises designed to assess strength, speed, reflexes, and endurance. To Danny's surprise, he consistently outperformed most of his cohort. The gravity in the facility seemed slightly lighter than Earth's, giving him an unexpected advantage. His human musculature, evolved for persistence hunting and tool use, proved remarkably adaptable to the Coalition's combat drills. Faster! Earth thing! Sergeant Karth would bellow as Danny sprinted across obstacle courses, climbed bizarre structures, and grappled with training dummies designed to simulate chitling attackers. The Horde won't wait for you to catch your breath. What was most noticeable to the alien instructors, however, was Danny's physiological response to stress. Humans, it turned out, were unusual in their production of adrenaline, cortisol, and other stress hormones. During particularly intense drills, Danny's body would kick into overdrive, flooding his system with natural performance enhancers that the Coalition scanners registered with increasing interest. "Your species manufactures combat drugs internally," Karth told him during one assessment, the oil-slick creature's voice holding something like respect. "Most inefficient delivery system, but impressive results." Danny had shrugged, wiping sweat from his face. "It's just adrenaline. Fight-or-flight response. Every human does it." This information had caused quite a stir among the assessment team. Danny frequently found himself subjected to additional scans, with medical specialists taking regular blood samples before and after high-stress exercises. He noticed other conscripts giving him a wider berth in the training areas, whispers following him through the facility. "They call you metabolic monster now," Meeker informed him during one nutritional period. "Rumors say your sweat is toxic. Your blood is weapon grade. Coalition scientists very interested." Danny snorted. "Great, just what I need." Hioki, who had become a constant presence, chittered something that made Meeker's antennae twitch. "Hioki says linguistic analysis of your speech patterns reveals high stress indicators, despite outward calm. Are you unwell?" Danny stared at the mantis-like creature. "Unwell? I've been kidnapped by aliens, forced into military training for a war I know nothing about, and apparently my body chemistry is now the subject of scientific curiosity. Yeah, I'd say I'm a little stressed." When Hioki's translation device processed this, the mantis made a series of rapid clicks that Danny had come to recognize as laughter. "What's so funny?" he demanded. Meeker translated Hioki's response. "Says your sarcasm displays cognitive resilience, good trait for survival." The conversation was interrupted by facility-wide lights pulsing in sequence, the signal for the next training block. As they rose to leave, Danny noticed a new face in the nutritional hall. A massive, bipedal creature with leathery gray skin and what appeared to be natural armor plating across its shoulders and back. Other conscripts hurried to get out of its path. "What's that?" Danny asked Meeker. "Colonian warform," Meeker replied quietly. "Upper-tier combatant, specially bred for frontline duty. Rarely interact with standard conscripts." Danny watched the Colonian lumber toward the exit, its heavy footfalls leaving subtle impressions in the facility's supposedly indestructible floor. "Why's it here with us, then?" Meeker's compound eyes flickered nervously. "Combat assessments begin soon. Colonian likely part of demonstration team." The insectoid hesitated. "Earth, Danny. These assessments. They are not simulations. Actual combat. Casualties occur." Danny felt his stomach drop. "You're saying they're going to make us fight? For real?" "Coalition must identify combat potential quickly. Resources limited. Ineffective conscripts reassigned or recycled." "Recycled?" Danny didn't like the sound of that. Meeker's antennae drooped. "Protein synthesis paste requires base material." Danny stared at his empty bowl, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. "You mean the food we've been eating is made from failed conscripts?" "Not exclusively," Meeker clicked apologetically. "But resource efficiency is Coalition priority." Before Danny could process this horrifying revelation, Sergeant Karth's voice blared over the facility's announcement system. "Attention cohort, 7 Gamma. Report to combat arena immediately. Assessments commence in 1 subcycle." The combat arena turned out to be a massive circular pit, surrounded by elevated observation platforms. Various Coalition officers and scientists looked down on the proceedings, their data screens flickering with information as each conscript entered the arena floor. Danny and about 20 others from his training cohort were lined up along one wall, while across the pit stood a smaller group that included the Colonian warform and several other large, obviously martial creatures. Sergeant Carth's oil-slick form rippled with anticipation as he addressed them. Combat assessment protocol is simple. You will be provided with standard-issue energy weapons. Demonstration opponents will engage in increasing intensity. Performance determines your combat classification and unit assignment. Assistants moved down the line, distributing what looked like pistols, made of some pearlescent material. When Danny received his, he turned it over uncertainly. There was no obvious trigger, safety, or even a barrel that he could identify. Weapon interfaces with users' neural patterns, explained the assistant. A floating gas bag creature with tendrils that manipulated the equipment. Point. Think fire. Simple. Danny pointed the weapon at the ground and thought about it firing. Nothing happened. He tried again, concentrating harder. Still nothing. Neural compatibility issues again, muttered Carth, gliding over. Primitive system. Here. He handed Danny what looked like a club made of chitinous material, roughly the size and shape of a baseball bat, but with an unsettling organic quality to it. Chitling Bone Club, primitive weapon for primitive species. Try not to embarrass yourself completely. The assessment began. One by one, conscripts were called forward to face opponents from the demonstration team. Some performed admirably, their energy weapons flashing as they ducked and weaved through the simulated combat. Others froze or fled, quickly subdued and dragged from the arena, their fate left to Danny's imagination. When his turn came, Danny stepped forward with the bone club gripped tightly in his sweaty hands. His opponent was not the Colonian, to his relief, but a quadrupedal creature with razor-sharp spines protruding from its back and limbs. Commence, Carth's voice echoed. The spined creature charged. Danny dove to the side, rolling and coming up in a defensive stance. Years of high school wrestling and bar fights had given him decent reflexes, but he was clearly outmatched in terms of natural weaponry. The creature pivoted and charged again. This time, Danny swung the club, connecting with the thing's flank. It barely seemed to notice. Panic began to rise in Danny's chest. His heart hammered, breath coming in sharp gasps as the creature circled him, looking for an opening. He could feel sweat soaking through his jumpsuit, his muscles tensing as primal survival instincts kicked in. And then something changed. The world seemed to slow down. Danny's vision sharpened, focusing with predatory clarity on his opponent's movements. He could hear his own heartbeat, feel the flood of chemicals surging through his system. When the creature charged again, Danny didn't dodge. He stepped into the attack, swinging the club with everything he had. The impact sent shockwaves up his arms, but the creature tumbled backward, obviously stunned. Danny pressed his advantage, moving with a speed and precision that surprised even him. Each blow landed with increasing force as his adrenaline peaked. Within moments, the spined creature was limping away, signaling submission. A murmur ran through the observation platforms. Danny stood in the center of the arena, chest heaving, the club hanging loosely at his side. He felt simultaneously exhausted and wired, his body trembling with the aftermath of the adrenaline surge. Interesting. Carth's voice cut through the buzz of conversation. 7294 Earth displays significant combat potential when threat response is triggered. Next opponent. Before Danny could protest, the Colonian warform stepped into the arena. It stood nearly 9 feet tall, its armor plating gleaming under the harsh lights. In one massive hand, it held what looked like a more advanced version of the energy weapons the others had used. "This is insane," Danny said, backing up. "I can't fight that thing." "Assessment continues," Carth replied implacably. "Combat potential must be fully evaluated." The Colonian raised its weapon. Danny dove as energy sizzled through the air where he'd been standing, rolling to his feet. He darted behind one of the few obstacles in the arena, a low barrier that provided minimal cover. "Think, Danny, think." The Colonian's heavy footsteps approached methodically. It was in no hurry, confident in its superiority. Danny glanced around desperately for anything that might help. His eyes fell on his club, then on the arena floor itself, which was covered in a material similar to packed earth. An idea formed. When the Colonian's shadow fell across his hiding spot, Danny burst into motion. Instead of retreating, he charged directly at the massive creature, ducking under its swing and sliding between its legs. Before it could turn, Danny had scrambled up its armored back, clinging to the plates like a rodeo rider. The Colonian roared, trying to dislodge him, but Danny held on with desperate strength. He brought the club down hard against the junction where the creature's armor met its leathery skin. Once, twice, 3 times, until he felt something give. The Colonian staggered, and Danny struck again at the same vulnerable spot. To the shock of everyone watching, the massive warform crashed to its knees. Danny, riding the fall, rolled clear and came up with the club raised defensively. The Colonian tried to rise but faltered, dark fluid leaking from the wound Danny had inflicted. Silence fell over the arena. Danny stood, panting, as medical teams rushed to attend to the fallen Colonian. He could feel the eyes of every coalition officer fixed on him, calculating, assessing, re-evaluating. "Assessment concluded," Karth announced, his voice oddly subdued. 7294 Earth demonstrates exceptional combat potential. Classification, Specialist Assault. The next day, Danny found himself summoned to a briefing room carved into the interior of what he now knew was a hollowed-out asteroid, serving as a forward operating base. The mess hall training facility had apparently been just the first step in his processing. Now, he was being prepared for actual deployment. Sergeant Karth and a collection of higher-ranking coalition officers waited for him. Holographic displays showed what appeared to be battle plans, shifting and updating as data streamed in. Danny noticed Hioki in a corner, monitoring equipment set up to record and translate. 7294 Earth began a tall, spindly creature with elaborate insignia adorning its exoskeleton. "I am Captain Gorvak, Tactical Commander for this sector. Your performance in combat assessment has attracted attention." Danny shifted uncomfortably. "Look, about that Colonian, I didn't mean to actually hurt it. I was just trying to survive." "The Colonian will recover," Karth interjected. "Though its pride may not. More importantly, your physiological response during combat has been analyzed. Most illuminating." A holographic display of Danny's body appeared in the center of the room, with certain systems highlighted in pulsing red. "Your species produces remarkable chemical compounds when threatened," Captain Gorvak continued. "Adrenaline, cortisol, endorphins, a natural combat enhancement cocktail that temporarily increases strength, speed, and pain tolerance. In your case, the response is particularly pronounced." "It's just how humans work," Danny said with a shrug. "Nothing special about me specifically." This statement caused another stir among the officers. Gorvak's head tilted at an angle that somehow conveyed intense interest. "You claim all members of your species share this trait. Fascinating. Our xenobiologists suggest your evolution must have occurred in a high-threat environment to develop such an extreme survival mechanism." "Earth can be pretty dangerous, I guess," Danny admitted. "But look, I'm still not clear on what's happening here. Am I being sent to fight these chitling things? Because I've got to tell you, I'm not a soldier. I fix tractors for a living." Captain Gorvak made a gesture that might have been dismissive. "Your previous occupation is irrelevant. Your combat potential has been assessed. You will be deployed with the next assault team to engage the Chitling Hive on asteroid base KX-12. The holographic display shifted to show a massive, irregular asteroid with what looked like tunnel entrances dotting its surface. "The Chitlings have established a breeding colony within KX-12, Karth explained. "If allowed to mature, the Queen will produce millions of soldiers that will overwhelm our defensive line. The assault team will penetrate the hive and neutralize the queen before this occurs. Danny stared at the hologram, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. And if I refuse? Refusal is not an option, Gorvak stated flatly. Conscription is binding. However, if it aids your motivation, successful completion of this mission will initiate discussion of your eventual repatriation. You mean I could go home? Back to Earth? The officers exchanged looks that Danny couldn't interpret. It would be considered, Gorvak said carefully. Before Danny could press further, the briefing room door slid open, and Meeker entered, now wearing what appeared to be light armor over its insectoid frame. Ah, yes, Karth said. 7294 Earth. You will be paired with conscript Meeker for this deployment. Its translation capabilities will facilitate communication, and your complementary physiologies should enhance survival probability. Danny felt a small measure of relief at seeing a familiar face. We're going together? Meeker's antennae twitched in what Danny had come to recognize as affirmation. I requested assignment. Thought familiar presence might improve your performance. The assault team deploys in one cycle, Gorvak announced. Prepare yourselves. Briefing materials on chitling behavior and hive structure will be provided. Dismissed. As they left the briefing room, Danny turned to Meeker. Did you know about this? That they'd be sending us into actual combat so soon? Suspected, Meeker clicked. Your performance-accelerated timeline. Coalition eager to utilize your capabilities. But I got lucky with that Colonian. I'm not actually a super soldier or whatever they think I am. Meeker's compound eyes reflected Danny's worried face. Not luck. Your physiology. When threatened, you become something else. Something dangerous. The insectoid hesitated. Coalition scientists have term for it. Translate roughly as combat drug producer. They believe your body chemistry is weapon. Danny ran a hand through his hair, frustration and fear bubbling up. Great. So they're sending me into an alien nest because I get an adrenaline rush under stress. This is insane. War is insane, Meeker agreed solemnly. But chitlings are worse. If they reach Earth... The insectoid didn't finish the thought. Danny's blood ran cold. He hadn't considered that Earth itself might be in danger from this conflict. Have they found Earth? Do they know where it is? Not yet, Meeker assured him. Coalition found you first. Small comfort, perhaps. They spent the remaining time before deployment reviewing information about their enemy. Chitlings, Danny learned, were insectoid hive organisms that reproduced at an alarming rate. They consumed organic matter, living or dead, and converted it into more chitlings. Their life cycle began with a queen, who established a nest and produced workers, soldiers, and eventually new queens. If left unchecked, a single queen could overrun an entire planetary system within months. The assault team consisted of 12 conscripts, each chosen for specific abilities that might prove useful in the tight confines of the hive tunnels. Danny and Meeker were designated as frontline units, tasked with clearing the path to the Queen's chamber, while specialists followed to plant explosive devices at key structural points. As they prepared to board the drop pods that would deliver them to the asteroid's surface, Sergeant Karth approached Danny with a final piece of equipment. Neural dampeners, he explained, attaching small devices to Danny's temples. Not for you. For the chitlings. They have limited telepathic abilities. Use them to coordinate attacks. These should provide some protection. Danny winced as the dampeners adhered to his skin with a cold, sucking sensation. Any other last-minute surprises I should know about? Karth's oil-slick form rippled in what might have been amusement. Only this. He handed Danny a new weapon, not the crude bone club from the arena, but a more sophisticated version made of the same pearlescent material as the energy pistols. Modified for your neural patterns. Point, think, cleave. Should be compatible with your primitive system. Danny tested the weight of the weapon, something between an axe and a sword, with an edge that seemed to shimmer between solid and energy. Thanks. I think. Don't die too quickly. 7294 Earth, Karth said, already turning away. The resources invested in your training should yield at least one successful deployment. The drop pods were barely large enough for a single occupant each, reminiscent of coffins with inertial dampening systems. As Danny strapped himself in, he caught a final glimpse of the launch bay, Coalition technicians scurrying about, other assault teams preparing for their own missions, the cold efficiency of a war machine that had been grinding away long before he'd been conscripted into it. The pod sealed with a hiss, and darkness enveloped him. A countdown appeared on the small internal display, numbers flashing by too quickly for comfort. Danny closed his eyes, thinking of Kansas, of the farm shop, of the simple life that seemed impossibly distant now. The launch was a controlled explosion, pressing Danny back into the cushioned interior with crushing force despite the inertial systems. His stomach lurched as the pod spun and tumbled through space, automatic guidance systems making minute corrections to keep it on trajectory toward the asteroid. The journey lasted only minutes, but it felt like an eternity of disorientation and nausea. Impact came with a bone-jarring crunch. Stabilizers fired. The pod's exterior superheated as it punched through the asteroid's minimal atmosphere and slammed into the rocky surface near one of the tunnel entrances. When the systems finally indicated safe extraction, Danny fumbled with the release mechanism, pushing the pod's hatch open to emerge onto the alien landscape. The asteroid's surface was pitted and scarred, its low gravity making movement awkward until Danny adjusted. Other pods had landed nearby, their occupants emerging in various states of disorientation. Meeker found him quickly, the insectoid's natural adaptability, making the transition to low gravity almost seamless. All units survived drop, Meeker reported, checking a device on its armor. Rendezvous at tunnel entrance Alpha 3, 50 meters north. The assault team gathered at the yawning mouth of the tunnel, a perfectly circular bore that plunged into the asteroid's interior. Unlike natural formations, this had clearly been created intentionally, its sides smooth and glistening with some viscous substance. Chitling excavation leaves chemical markers, explained the team's scout, a salamander-like creature with bioluminescent patches. Digestive enzymes break down rock. Tunnel walls absorb nutrients. Everything about them consumes. With chemical lights and weapons ready, the team began their descent. The tunnel sloped gently downward, widening as they proceeded. The walls pulsed with veins of yellowish fluid that provided a sickly illumination, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Tunnels are alive, Meeker whispered, noticing Danny's discomfort. Grown, not dug. We walk inside Chitling digestive system, essentially. That's disgusting, Danny muttered, trying not to touch the walls. Effective, Meeker corrected. Chitlings waste nothing, consume, convert, expand. Perfect organic efficiency. The deeper they went, the warmer the air became, humid and thick with the smell of decay and something else. Something chemical that made Danny's nose burn. The neural dampeners at his temples hummed occasionally, suggesting telepathic activity nearby. Close now, the scout announced, its bioluminescent patches dimming to avoid detection. First chamber ahead, likely worker concentration. The tunnel opened into a cavernous space where hundreds of worker chitlings scurried about. They resembled nothing so much as giant ants with too many legs and segmented bodies that glistened wetly in the bioluminescent light. Each was about the size of a large dog, with mandibles that could clearly shear through metal if needed. The team crouched at the tunnel entrance, assessing. Their plan was to skirt the chamber, finding a connecting tunnel that would lead deeper toward the Queen's location. Stealth was preferable to engagement at this stage. They had almost made it to the far side when one of the workers paused, its antennae waving in their direction. It made a high-pitched clicking sound that was immediately echoed by others nearby. "We've been detected," hissed the scout. "Prepare for engagement." The workers surged toward them en masse, a wave of chitinous bodies and snapping mandibles. Danny felt his heart rate spike, the familiar flood of adrenaline coursing through his system as his body prepared for fight or flight. With the tunnel at their backs, flight wasn't an option. He raised his weapon as the first chitlings reached their position. To his surprise, the modified blade responded to his thoughts, extending into a longer, more lethal form as he swung it in a wide arc. It cleaved through the first 3 workers as if they were made of paper, ichor spraying in a wide pattern. The battle became a blur of motion and sensation. Danny's enhanced reflexes took over, his movements becoming preternatural in their speed and precision. He was dimly aware of Meeker beside him, the insectoid using its natural agility to dart between attackers, disabling them with precise strikes to vulnerable joints. The rest of the team formed a defensive circle, energy weapons flashing as they cut down worker after worker. But for every chitling that fell, 2 more scrambled forward from hidden recesses in the chamber walls. "Too many!" shouted one of the team members, a bulky amphibian whose skin was secreting some kind of defensive acid. "We need to break through!" Danny found himself at the forefront of the assault, his blade carving a path through the chitling mass. His vision had narrowed to a tunnel, all extraneous information filtered out by his combat-enhanced senses. He moved on instinct, each swing and step calculated for maximum efficiency by a brain awash in survival chemicals. They fought their way to another tunnel entrance, this one sloping even deeper into the asteroid. As the last team member squeezed through, they triggered a collapse device that brought down tons of rock, temporarily sealing the chamber behind them. In the sudden quiet, Danny became aware of his own labored breathing, the sting of minor wounds across his arms and torso, the trembling in his muscles as the adrenaline began to ebb. "Status report," demanded the team leader, a veteran coalition soldier with mechanical enhancements visible beneath torn armor. Each member checked in. 2 minor injuries, no casualties, equipment mostly intact. They had been lucky. "Earth, Danny." Meeker clicked, mandibles working in apparent concern. "Your physiological state appears extreme. Heart rate elevated beyond normal parameters." Danny leaned against the tunnel wall, trying to steady his breathing. "I'm okay, just coming down from the rush." He glanced at his hands, surprised to find them steady despite the adrenaline crash. "Is it always like this, the fighting?" "First wave is typically smallest," the team leader said grimly. "Deeper we go, more concentrated the resistance. Queen protects herself with successive layers of defenders." They moved on, following the tunnel as it wound deeper into the asteroid's core. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, saturated with the chemical signatures of the hive. Danny's neural dampeners hummed constantly now, the devices warm against his temples. The next chamber was smaller, but more heavily defended. Soldier chitlings waited for them, larger than the workers, with reinforced mandibles and what appeared to be natural armor plating. These didn't rush mindlessly, but moved with tactical coordination that suggested higher intelligence. The battle was brutal and swift. Danny found himself separated from Meeker, surrounded by 3 soldiers that moved in perfect synchronization to flank him. His weapon flashed, taking the leg from one, but the other 2 pressed their advantage, mandibles snapping at his arms and legs. Pain lanced through Danny's thigh as one set of mandibles found purchase, cutting deep into muscle. He cried out, stumbling, as the chitling attempted to drag him down. Survival instinct took over completely. Danny's vision went red at the edges, his heartbeat thundering in his ears as his body dumped every combat chemical it could produce into his bloodstream. With a roar that didn't sound human even to his own ears, Danny brought his weapon down on the chitling's head, splitting its carapace and splattering its insides across the chamber floor. He whirled to face the others, moving with a speed and strength that surprised even him. His blade became an extension of his arm, cutting and slashing with precision born of desperation. When it was over, Danny stood amidst a circle of dismembered chitling parts, his jumpsuit soaked with both alien ichor and his own blood. The rest of the team stared at him with expressions ranging from awe to fear. "Confirmed," muttered the team leader. "Combat drug production extreme in Earth specimen." Meeker approached cautiously, bearing medical supplies. "Leg injury requires attention. Hold still." As the insectoid applied a sealing agent to the wound, Danny became aware of a strange sensation, a pressure building in the chamber, a vibration that he felt rather than heard. The neural dampeners at his temples were now uncomfortably hot. "Something's coming," he warned, just as the far wall of the chamber began to bulge inward. The bulge became a rupture, and through it poured a new horror, a massive, worm-like creature with a circular maw ringed with teeth. It was easily 20 feet long and as big around as a tractor tire, its segmented body pulsing as it squeezed into the chamber. "Tunnel worm!" shouted the scout. "Digestive processor! Evasive action!" The team scattered, but the worm moved with surprising speed for its bulk, lunging at the nearest target, which happened to be Danny. Still recovering from treating his leg wound, he couldn't move quickly enough. The circular maw closed around him, teeth sinking into his torso as he was lifted off the ground. Danny screamed, the pain immediate and overwhelming. He could hear the team's weapons firing, felt the impacts as they struck the worm's armored hide without effect. Then he was moving, being drawn into the creature's gullet as its powerful muscles contracted. Darkness enveloped him as he was swallowed whole. Digestive acids burned against his skin, his jumpsuit providing minimal protection. Danny thrashed, panic giving way to a cold, calculating rage. He still had his weapon, clutched in a death grip as he was pulled deeper into the worm's body. With the last of his strength, Danny drove the blade into the soft tissue surrounding him, using it to arrest his downward progress. Then he began to cut, methodically, viciously, sawing through the worm's innards with single-minded determination. His lungs burned, the air inside the creature toxic and scarce. But he kept cutting, kept moving upward toward where he thought the head must be. Blood, his own and the worm's, made his grip slippery. The neural dampeners had failed, fried by the creature's digestive fluids, and Danny's mind was suddenly assaulted by alien thoughts, hunger, pain, confusion. The telepathic connection worked both ways, he realized dimly. The worm could feel his rage, his refusal to die quietly. With a final, desperate lunge, Danny drove his blade through what felt like a crucial organ. The worm convulsed violently, its body thrashing as Danny continued to cut his way upward. Finally, with a wet, tearing sound, he broke through, emerging from the creature's side in a gush of viscous fluid. Danny fell to the chamber floor, gasping and retching. The worm writhed in its death throes nearby, emitting high-pitched squeals that hurt his ears. Through blurred vision, he saw the rest of the team staring in disbelief. "Impossible," the team leader was saying. "Nothing survives tunnel worm ingestion." Meeker rushed to Danny's side, helping him to his feet. Earth Danny's combat chemistry apparently extends to impossible survival scenarios. Danny wiped blood and digestive fluid from his face, his body trembling with exhaustion and the aftermath of more adrenaline than any human system was designed to process. "Did anyone else make it? Is everyone okay?" A head count revealed that they had lost 2 team members in the chaos, a weapons specialist and one of the demolition experts. The mission parameters had to be adjusted, but the primary objective remained: reach the Queen, neutralize the threat. They pressed on, moving deeper into the hive through tunnels that grew increasingly organic in appearance. The rock walls gave way to a substance that resembled cartilage and chitin fused together, pulsating slightly as if the entire structure were breathing. "Approaching Queen's domain," the scout reported. "Life signs massive ahead. Final chamber likely." They paused to prepare, checking weapons and setting charges at strategic points along the tunnel. If they couldn't complete the mission, they would at least collapse as much of the hive as possible on their way out. Danny leaned against Meeker, his injuries making movement difficult despite the combat chemicals still coursing through his system. "I don't know how much more I've got in me," he admitted quietly. "Remarkable you function at all," Meeker clicked, adjusting something on its armor. "Most species would have shut down after half what you've endured." The insectoid hesitated. "Earth, Danny, if we do not survive this assault, it has been an honor serving with you." Danny managed a weak smile. "Likewise, Meeker. You're the only thing that's made any sense in this whole mess." The team leader signaled readiness, and they moved forward into the final approach. The tunnel widened dramatically, opening into a cathedral-like space that defied the asteroid's natural limitations. The chamber rose at least 8 stories high, its walls formed of a living, pulsating material that glowed with bioluminescent veins. And at its center, suspended in a web of tendons and supportive structures, hung the Chitling Queen. She was massive, easily the size of a bus, with a distended abdomen that pulsed rhythmically as it produced eggs at an alarming rate. Workers scurried about beneath her, collecting the eggs and transporting them to incubation chambers, visible through openings in the walls. Soldier chitlings stood guard at regular intervals, their antennae constantly moving, scanning for threats. The assault team crouched at the chamber entrance, momentarily awed by the spectacle. "Explosive placement required at central support structure," the team leader whispered, indicating the thick column of organic material that rose to support the Queen's web. "Demolition team, prepare to advance under covering fire." Before they could implement the plan, however, a psychic wave slammed into them, the Queen, somehow sensing their presence despite the neural dampeners. Danny clutched his head as alien thoughts invaded his mind. Hunger, territoriality, the cold calculation of a hive mind that viewed them as nothing more than protein to be processed. The soldiers reacted instantly, swarming toward their position with terrifying coordination. The battle was joined in earnest, energy weapons flashing as the team fought desperately to hold their ground. Danny forced himself upright, ignoring the pain of his injuries as fresh adrenaline flooded his system. He moved forward with Meeker at his side, cutting a path through the soldier chitlings toward the central support column. If they could just reach it, place the charges, they could end this. They had almost made it when disaster struck. A soldier chitling, larger than the others, lunged from a hidden recess. Danny pivoted to face it, but Meeker shoved him aside, taking the full brunt of the attack. The chitling's mandibles closed around the insectoid's thorax with a sickening crunch. "Meeker!" Danny screamed, slashing at the soldier with his blade, driving it back. But it was too late. Meeker's compound eyes were already dimming, green fluid leaking from the fatal wound. "Complete. Mission." Meeker clicked weakly, mandibles moving in what might have been its species' version of a smile. "Tell them about Earth. Beautiful planet. Worth saving." The light faded from Meeker's eyes. Danny felt something break inside him. Not physical, but something deeper. Grief gave way to rage, pure and overwhelming. His vision tunneled, narrowing to a single point of focus. The Queen, suspended above, the source of all this death. With an inhuman roar, Danny charged forward, cutting down anything in his path with mechanical precision. His body moved on autopilot, driven by a cocktail of combat drugs so potent that it would likely kill him once the battle ended. But in that moment, Danny Rucker didn't care about survival. He cared only about vengeance. He reached the central column and began to climb, his blade sinking into the organic material to create handholds. Chitling soldiers swarmed after him, but they were slower on the vertical surface, their bodies designed for tunnel fighting. Danny climbed higher, approaching the Queen's massive form. The psychic pressure intensified as he drew closer, the Queen attempting to overwhelm his mind with alien thoughts. Without the neural dampeners, Danny should have been incapacitated, but rage and grief proved stronger than the Queen's telepathy. He pushed through the mental assault, climbing ever higher. When he reached the Queen's level, Danny found himself on a platform of cartilage and chitin that formed part of her support structure. Up close, she was even more horrific, a bloated, pulsing mass of reproductive machinery. Her vestigial head dominated by massive compound eyes that swiveled to focus on him. Worker chitlings swarmed to protect her, but Danny moved through them like a force of nature, his blade flashing in the bioluminescent light. He reached the Queen's distended abdomen and began to cut, his weapon sinking deep into her flesh. The Queen's psychic scream nearly overwhelmed him, flooding his mind with pain and rage. The entire chamber shook as she thrashed, her massive body twisting in agony. Danny held on, continuing to cut, to tear, to destroy this thing that had taken Meeker, that threatened everything he cared about. His hands were slick with the Queen's fluids, his own blood mixing with hers as he carved deeper into her vital organs. The weapon's edge began to dull against her internal armor, so Danny cast it aside and continued with his bare hands, tearing and ripping with strength, born of chemical enhancement and primal fury. Finally, his fingers closed around something vital, a pulsing organ at the Queen's core. With the last of his strength, Danny pulled, tearing the organ free in a gush of viscous fluid. The Queen convulsed one final time, then went still. Throughout the chamber, the soldier chitlings faltered, their coordinated movements becoming erratic as the hive mind that guided them fragmented. The psychic pressure lifted from Danny's mind, leaving him suddenly, devastatingly alone with his thoughts. He collapsed onto the platform, the Queen's lifeless body settling around him. Below, he could hear the remaining team members fighting their way through the disorganized chitling forces, securing the chamber. But Danny couldn't move, couldn't think. His body had finally reached its limits, the combat chemicals that had sustained him now turning toxic in his bloodstream. Darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. Danny thought of Kansas, of the farm shop, of Meeker's final words. Worth saving. He hoped so. Then, consciousness fled, and he knew no more. Danny woke to the sterile environment of what appeared to be a medical bay. Monitoring equipment beeped softly, tracking his vital signs. His body felt leaden, every muscle screaming in protest as he tried to move. "Remarkable recovery continues," said a voice nearby. A coalition medical officer, whose species Danny couldn't identify through blurred vision. Subject maintained heart rate of 220 beats per minute for over 30 minutes. Temperature peaked at 104 degrees. By all accounts, should be dead. "But isn't," came another voice. Sergeant Carth, unmistakable even through Danny's disorientation. "Proving once again that Earth physiology defies conventional understanding." Danny tried to speak, managing only a hoarse whisper. "Meeker?" There was a pause. "Conscript Meeker did not survive the mission," Carth said finally, along with 3 other team members. But the objective was achieved. The Chitling Queen was neutralized. The hive collapsed. A significant victory. Danny closed his eyes, grief washing over him anew. "The others? The team?" "Recovering, like yourself. Though none sustained injuries as severe. Your combat drug production exceeded all projected parameters. Coalition medical staff is impressed." Danny didn't feel impressive. He felt hollowed out, used up. "How long have I been here?" 3 cycles, Carth replied. "Longest recovery period recorded for your species." "My species," Danny repeated bitterly. "You don't know anything about my species. You've only seen me." Another pause. There is someone here who wishes to speak with you. Has been waiting for your recovery. Danny heard the door slide open, followed by the now familiar sound of chittering mandibles. He turned his head to see Hioki approaching, the mantis-like linguist's monitoring equipment, replaced by what appeared to be a more sophisticated translation device. "Earth, Danny," came a voice from the device, still mechanical, but with better inflection than before. "Recovery pleases. Many questions for you now." Danny managed to sit up slightly, wincing at the pain. "Hioki, you're still analyzing my speech patterns?" The mantis made a series of clicks that the device translated as laughter. "No longer merely analysis. Communication now. Your battlefield performance provides leverage. Coalition command now very interested in Earth." Danny's words. "Leverage for what?" "For truth," Hioki replied. "For understanding. Coalition took you without knowledge, without context. Now wishes to learn." Over the next several hours, as Danny's strength gradually returned, he found himself engaged in the first real conversation he'd had since his abduction. Hioki's improved translator allowed for more nuanced communication, and the linguist seemed genuinely interested in understanding Danny as a person, not just as a combat asset. Danny explained Earth, its size, its diverse ecosystems, its technologies. He described his life as a mechanic, the workings of tractors and engines, the small Kansas town he called home. Hioki listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that revealed both intelligence and empathy. "Your world," the mantis eventually said, "sounds most fascinating. Different from any in Coalition. Your species' adaptation, combat chemistry, unprecedented. Coalition scientists theorize must have evolved in extreme predator environment." Danny shrugged. "We're just animals that got smart enough to build cities. Every human does what I did, to some degree. Fight-or-flight response. We call it." Hioki's antennae twitched dramatically. "Every human? All produce combat chemicals?" "Yeah, of course. It's basic human biology. Some people might produce more than others in a crisis, but everyone has the capacity." This information seemed to cause Hioki significant excitement. The mantis excused itself abruptly, leaving Danny alone with his thoughts. Later that day, Danny was deemed recovered enough to leave the medical bay. He was provided with new quarters, significantly more comfortable than his previous accommodations in the training facility, and invited to join a celebration in the field kitchen. The surviving members of the assault team had gathered, along with various coalition officers and support staff. There was an atmosphere of cautious victory, one battle won in a long war, but a significant one nonetheless. Captain Gorvak approached Danny as he entered, the tall, spindly commander, inclining his head in what appeared to be a gesture of respect. 7294 Earth, Danny Rucker, Gorvak said formally. "Your service to the Coalition has been noted and recorded. The destruction of the KX-12 Queen will delay Chitling expansion in this sector by at least 12 cycles." Danny nodded, unsure how to respond to the alien commander's praise. "Thank you. I guess I was just trying to survive." "And that," Gorvak replied, "appears to be what your species does best." He gestured to a nearby table. "Please, join us. There is much to discuss regarding your future role." As Danny took a seat, he found himself the center of attention. Coalition officers and scientists peppered him with questions about his experience in the hive, his confrontation with the Queen, his physiological responses. He answered as best he could, though much of the battle remained a blur of adrenaline and instinct. Eventually, the conversation turned to Earth itself. Hioki had apparently shared Danny's earlier descriptions, generating considerable interest among the Coalition leadership. "Your home planet," Gorvak said carefully. "Sounds like a remarkable place. Diverse ecosystems, varied species, abundant resources. And your dominant species, humans, all possess this combat drug production capability." Danny nodded, taking a sip of something that wasn't quite water, but was at least potable. Pretty much, yeah. It's just how we're built. And how many of your kind inhabit this Earth? Asked a scientist, whose species Danny couldn't identify. The question seemed innocent enough. About 8 billion, last I checked, Danny replied. The room went silent. Every alien eye, stalk, or sensory organ fixed on Danny with sudden intensity. He glanced around, confused by the reaction. What? Did I say something wrong? Captain Gorvac exchanged looks with his officers, then turned back to Danny. 8 billion individuals, all capable of producing combat drugs naturally, all evolved for survival in high-threat environments. And the Coalition has never encountered your species before now. Danny shrugged. Earth is pretty far out on the galactic arm. I guess. We haven't developed faster-than-light travel yet. If that's what you're wondering. We're still mostly confined to our solar system. More significant looks were exchanged. Gorvac tapped something into a device on his arm, and a holographic star chart appeared above the table. With precise movements, he navigated through the three-dimensional map until he located a small, blue-green dot in an unremarkable sector. "This is Earth?" he asked, indicating the dot. Danny leaned forward, studying the chart. The star patterns were unfamiliar from this perspective, but the arrangement of planets around the sun seemed right. Yeah, that looks like our solar system. Third planet from the sun. Gorvac's translator gave a single word. No. Danny blinked, confused. No? No what? The Coalition captain's posture had changed, becoming more rigid, more formal. The celebration is concluded. Return to your quarters. 7294 Earth. We will continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting. As the room cleared, Danny found himself escorted back to his quarters by armed guards, a new development that sent a chill down his spine. Something had changed, and not for the better. Hours later, Danny was summoned to a secure briefing room. Captain Gorvac waited, along with Sergeant Karth and several high-ranking Coalition officers Danny hadn't met before. The star chart from earlier was displayed prominently. Danny Rucker of Earth, Gorvac began formally. The information you have provided requires significant strategic re-evaluation. We must be absolutely certain of its accuracy. Danny shifted uncomfortably under their collective gaze. I told you the truth. What's the problem? Gorvac gestured to the star chart. The problem, as you put it, is that your planet, Earth, lies directly in the projected path of the main Chitling advance. Based on current expansion rates, they will reach your system within 12 Coalition cycles. Danny felt the blood drain from his face. They're heading toward Earth? Can't you stop them? The Coalition defensive line is overextended, Karth interjected, his oil-slick form rippling with what might have been agitation. Resources stretched thin. KX-12 was merely one of hundreds of breeding colonies. But that's not the primary concern, Gorvac continued. Your revelation about Earth's population presents both opportunity and risk. 8 billion combat-capable individuals could significantly alter the balance of this conflict. Danny began to understand the implication. You want to recruit more humans. To fight your war? To fight our common enemy, Gorvac corrected. If the Chitlings reach Earth, they will consume every living thing. This is not a matter of politics, but survival. Danny stared at the star chart, at the tiny blue-green dot that represented everything he knew. And if Earth refuses to join your coalition? If we want to defend ourselves our own way? The silence that followed was answer enough. Gorvac eventually broke it, his voice carefully neutral. The Coalition Security Council will need to evaluate all options. In the meantime, you will remain here as both representative of your species and valuable combat asset. I'm a prisoner, Danny stated flatly. A guest, Karth countered, with restricted movement privileges. For your own safety. Danny looked from one alien face to another, seeking some sign of the understanding or empathy he'd briefly found with Meeker and Hioki. He found none. "When can I go home?" "You promised to consider repatriation after the mission." "That," Gorvac said carefully, "has become significantly more complicated." Later, alone in his quarters, Danny stood at the viewport looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, home, unaware of the cosmic horror moving inexorably toward it. Unaware, too, of the coalition that saw its population as a resource to be exploited in a war they didn't choose. He thought of Meeker, of their brief friendship forged in the most unlikely circumstances. Worth saving, the insectoid had said of Earth. But at what cost? And who got to decide? Danny placed his hand against the cold viewport, his reflection overlaying the distant stars. The face that looked back at him seemed older, harder, the face of someone who had seen too much, learned too much to ever go back to fixing tractors and dreaming of cold beer after a long day's work. Whatever happened next, Danny Rucker knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. Not for him. And not for the 8 billion humans who had just become the most valuable commodity in an interstellar war. The weight of that knowledge settled on his shoulders like a physical burden as he stared out at the cosmos. A Kansas farm boy, suddenly cast as the unwitting ambassador of humanity's future. For better or worse, the universe now knew that Earth existed, and it was coming, in one form or another, to collect.